What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, end of the week here, January 6th, 2017. And boy, it is a busy, busy news day. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials and keeping us out of trouble. And, of course, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of our show today. Now, obviously, the big news, it's all over the media right now. There's been a mass shooting at the Fort Lauderdale airport. Apparently, this gunman just walked into a baggage claim area and started shooting in all directions. He was not trying to shoot anybody specific. He just emptied his gun, reloaded, continued shooting. Police didn't show up to arrest him until after he'd run out of bullets. And I'm looking at all, 5 dead, 8 more evacuated for injuries. And if just one of those people had been allowed to be carrying concealed, there'd only be one death, and that would be the shooter. Now, the shooter's been identified already as a gentleman named Esteban Santiago. He's born up in New Jersey. And the interesting thing is he was carrying a military ID. And a lot of people are scratching their head about that one, and nobody's really sure what's going on. There's no talk about motive, but there's still going on, and it's absolutely dominating the media coverage, which probably a good thing out of that is they're not covering those Senate hearings about the Russian hacking anymore, because those aren't going too well, because every time one of these intelligence officials comes on out with another lame statement, it gets shot down, torn to shreds on the independent media, and they weren't really doing very well. So at least they can say, they're not paying attention to us anymore. And things are not going well with that whole Russia hacking nonsense. Congress has just announced they are not going to form a select committee to investigate Russian hacking of the election. And, of course, John McCain is just having a meltdown. He's saying, I will not sleep until we have, started war with Russia. Well, okay, Songbird, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers, and we'll call Putin and tell him you're on your way to whip his rear end all by yourself here. And it is amazing the lengths that the liberal crybabies and whiners have gone to try and discredit Donald Trump here, and as expected, there was a very brief and totally futile effort to obstruct Congress official certification of the Electoral College results, which happened earlier today, and they got on in there, and a bunch of Democrats got up and said, no, we challenge this, we challenge that, we're not going to do that. And I guess everybody kind of is really fed up with this whole thing because they didn't really have the legal requirements to mount a challenge, because you have to have both a House member and a senator concurring on a particular challenge. None of the senators stepped forward to participate, but the Democratic representatives, Raskin, Jayapal, just kept trying to raise objections. We object, and Biden cut them off basically and said, there is no debate. If it's not signed by a senator, the objection cannot be entertained. And then he said, it is over, which triggered cheers and laughter in the room, including House Speaker Paul Ryan. Now, this kind of behavior is an insult to the millions of Americans who voted for Trump. It's an insult to all Americans to see our so-called political leaders behaving like such children. And it also proves that the Democrats are no longer the party of the people, if indeed they ever really were. And they've become a bunch of undemocratic sore losers who believe that lying and cheating are their divine right, and if they don't get their way, then it'll be followed by riots and all this other stuff. So as far as the letter of the law and the Constitution is concerned, Donald Trump is the next president of the United States of America. All we have to worry about now are the non-legal means of keeping him from the office, and I'm sure everybody's paying very close attention to that. They are predicting 1 million people at least will be showing up for the Trump inauguration. The people trying to organize protests of the inauguration are claiming that they'll get 200,000 to show up. I seriously doubt that. I seriously doubt there will be that many protesters up there at all. Besides, if they're up there protesting, then they don't get to go to that big star-studded gala down in Florida that's taking place at the exact same time. And I'm going to make a prediction that that one craters as well. Nobody's going to tune on in. And still, the liberal media is out there just doing everything they can to attack Donald Trump. He's not even in the job yet, and they're after him. And over at MSNBC, Rachel Maddow was joking that if she could ever get Donald Trump on her show, her first question would be whether he plans to send her to a camp. Ooh, we're bringing back the camps. And, of course, George Soros is still out there screaming, Donald Trump is a dictator and a threat to the New World Order. George, what do you think the New World Order is, if not a global dictatorship? Look at the European Union and what a dictatorship that turned into. And I'm sure George is out there saying, well, his dictatorship is bad and my dictatorship is good and I spent billions of dollars for my dictatorship and how dare he get in my way. Anyway, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining our network. And the media is still at it. They're still out there. Oddly enough, former NPR news host Michelle Norris is out there claiming that Trump's slogan, Make America Great Again, is really a deeply encoded message that signals to white people that people of color will be sent to the back of the line. This lady's on serious medication, or if she's not, she ought to be. Because, I mean, this is just utterly, utterly ridiculous. Now, the House has already passed a bill that will literally undo the last 60 days of Barack Obama's rules and regulations. It has to go to the Senate now, and I'm sure they'll just kind of let it sit and debate, and they'll have a final vote on it somewhere around the 20th of this month. So things are already looking up here, that a lot of the damage that the liberalologists have done to this country is going to be unraveled, and that's a very good thing. Get away from all this PC nonsense. Obama's still out there worried about his legacy. What's the best point of your legacy? Well, the little boys can use the little girls' room. I'm the first president to do that. Yeah, probably with some very good reason. So let's get on over to this Senate hearing about Russian hacking, and Russia is bad, and Russia's evil, and Russia's this, and Russia's that. And again, if there's anything good about this shooting in Fort Lauderdale, it's that the TV news have an excuse not to cover those hearings because they are not going very well, and some rather damaging admissions are being made in there. And one thing you need to keep in mind as you listen to all this screaming about bad Russia, Russia hacking this and that, these are this very same exact people who sold us the Iraq War on the claim that we're absolutely certain Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. He has sarin, he has VX, he has mustard gas, he has nuclear weapons, he's got reruns of the Brady Bunch or whatever it is that they're going to inflict on us. Now, the Director of National Intelligence, soon to be retired Director of National Intelligence, Chief Clapper, took a swipe at Trump and Julian Assange. You know, how dare you question us? And basically chastised verbally President-elect Donald Trump for disparaging the intelligence community. And we all remember the last president who disparaged the intelligence community. It was John F. Kennedy. Now, this story about the DNC servers is getting more and more interesting. Yesterday, we reported that the FBI had not actually done a forensic analysis on the DNC servers following the supposed hack by Russia. Then we found out that the Democrats refused to let the FBI look at the servers to do a forensic analysis to see who had actually broken in there. And instead, the Democrats insisted the FBI accept the word of an outside contractor, which turns out to be a gentleman from CrowdStrike, the exact same company that published that initial report saying, oh yes, it was Russia. And it turns out CrowdStrike's Chief Technology Officer and co-founder, Dmitry Alperovich, is a fellow at the Atlantic Council, an organization closely associated with Ukraine. And looking at the Atlantic Council's publications and so forth, their main policy goal appears to be confrontation with Russia. So this outside contractor is part of the problem, part of the group that's trying to start a war with Russia. And I'm sure there's a very good reason the DNC refused to allow the FBI to look at the servers. There wasn't actually any evidence on it that showed they were hacked by Russia or anybody else. It was an internal leak. Reuters is reporting that the newest report from the CIA is they've identified the Russian officials who stole the information from the Democrats and Podesta's computers and handed it to a third party, who then handed it to Julian Assange without telling him it came from Russia, all under the orders of Vladimir Putin. The obvious motto of the U.S. government at this point is, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again, because that's all they know how to do. And when each lie craters, they just come up with a bigger and more grandiose one. They're trying to find a lie that's so big and horrific it will shock you into believing that it's true without question. Well, the days when the big lie would actually work are pretty much gone, because for the big lie to work, you have to have a population that is predisposed to trust the liar. That part is now gone. A lot of people talk about Adolf Hitler and the big lie because he wrote about it in his book Mein Kampf. But the reality is, in Mein Kampf, Hitler did not advocate the use of the big lie. He was warning people against it. Little side note, the publication of Mein Kampf is now legal again in Germany. It's been banned since the end of World War II, and finally it expired, and they said, well, it's history, we'll do it. It's a runaway bestseller. Hitler may have been a lousy artist, but apparently he was a good writer. John McAfee is out there saying that all of this Russia bashing, Russia hacking is the most deceptive propaganda to date being perpetrated on the American public. I don't know that it's all that deceptive. Nobody's buying it. But he makes a very valid point, and that is simply that Russia wouldn't have left obvious fingerprints pointing to themselves. Only somebody trying to frame Russia would do that. Russia's cyber experts are just as smart as our cyber criminals, and they know to route their nefarious business through machines all over the world. So you're not going to get a source IP. You're going to get the IP of the last machine in a long chain of compromised machines, and you can't trace past that. And if the cyber criminals are doing it, Russia would certainly do it. The fact that they claim that they've identified Russian IPs suggests a frame-up. And maybe that's why the Department of Homeland Security was trying to hack into these computerized voting systems in Georgia and 3 other states to plant evidence implicating Russia in rigging the election. The U.S. government has now officially labeled all of the expelled Russian diplomats as spies. This apparently includes the chef at the consulate, who, in between making borscht, was doing something. Basically, what we're seeing here is CYA mode. All of these U.S. intelligence officials are covering for each other by going along with the collective lie, saying Russia is a full-scope cyber actor, which is probably true, which poses a major threat to America rather. Really? Why? What's his motive? We're hearing all this thing about Russia wants to come and take over America, Russia wants to take over Europe. Why would Putin want to do that? Both the U.S. and Europe are on the edge of bankruptcy. They're corrupt beyond belief. Their infrastructure is decayed from decades of neglect. The places are in chaos from illegal immigration and refugees. Putin doesn't want these places. Why would he? Why would any sane person want to grab Europe and the United States right now? Putin's got enough problems taking care of Russia. He doesn't need to take on the problems of Europe and the United States. It's ridiculous. I loved it when they were trying to claim that Russia was getting ready to steal Alaska back. And Putin's response was classic. He said, we already have enough frozen wasteland in Siberia. Why would we want Alaska? It's amazing. Now, a little reminder for everybody, as you watch all of this stuff coming out of the corporate media, back in 2013, the U.S. government repealed the laws that said it was illegal for the government to use propaganda on you. Now, of course, they've been doing it all along, but it was illegal. In 2013, they legalized it, and they're spending your tax dollars to lie to you. And I don't think that's anything any taxpayer agrees with. I don't think I can find a taxpayer anyway that says, is it okay with you that the government takes your money away from you and then uses it to lie to you and trick you into, well, for one thing, paying more taxes? I don't think any taxpayer is going to say yes to that. And that, in a sense, is taxation without representation here. All right, let's grab ourselves a quick phone call. Tim in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, I found some of the gold finally. Anyway, in Lord's, France, I believe, there's a huge warehouse that we've got full of this stuff, and I'm just wondering how we can go get it, because we sure need it back.
You're talking about the gold that disappeared from the New York Fed or Fort Knox?
Well, this is what has been run back through the Vatican, and it's amazing. There's a lot of this coming out, and this is good. But yeah, it has to do with Russia too. Remember now, Russia don't have as much as they need either. It comes back to the World Bank, of course. In other words, the Fed Reserve and all that. And these guys literally have amassed a major amount. Let's just say that there's a huge warehouse vault over there. So that's about where a third of it is. But I didn't know if you'd heard about this or not yet. I
hadn't heard about that. Hadn't heard about that.
Well, I think it's going to start coming out. About that. But this is what this is all about. And but yeah, no, they're blaming Vladimir Putin for all this, and he's not doing any of this. He's really doing well for what he's having to put up with.
Yeah, he really
we
is.
We have about 25 of the anti-ballistic missiles here in America to take out the missiles coming at us, and I think he's got almost 1,200 to take out those coming at him. So he's actually preparing right. But yeah, I think he's going to do the right thing. I don't know. We're just going to have to wait these next 2 weeks and see what happens.
Yeah, well, any provocations are clearly going to be coming from our side. Putin doesn't want war. He's got no reason to have war. The U.S. has the motive for war. They need to destroy the ruble and the yuan, or foreign demand for the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking is going to collapse. And without that, there's nothing else left to support our economy. Our manufacturing is in decline. Our consumers are broke and hopelessly in debt. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. There's nothing to work with, which unfortunately is a major problem for incoming President Trump to have to deal with. But a war isn't going to solve it. War has never really solved a nation's economic woes. It just sort of masks the symptoms with a high fever of wartime and hope that everything will sort itself out.
Well, I believe part of this is covering up the $223 trillion in fiat money. In other words, the last 15 years, they've actually printed $223 trillion extra dollars. And I think that's what all this comes down to. In other words, the same reason why President Obama went ahead and did the extra land grab here this last week. I believe he's 553 million acres now that has been federally reserved. Isn't that correct?
Well, the land grabs were a combination of Obama wanting to, basically have his name on these national monuments. It was a way to circumvent the legal challenges arising out of the conflict over the Bundy Ranch incident. And again, it locked away natural resources from the American people, making us dependent on foreign suppliers who also happen to be good political campaign donors and so forth. Anyway, listen, Tim, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the media is still adversarial to Donald Trump. You'd think they would wake up and understand that they're not going to survive the next 4 years without making peace with not just Donald Trump, but everybody that they have defamed and smeared. As you know, WikiLeaks was threatening a lawsuit against CNN over this former CIA deputy director accused Julian Assange of being a pedophile on the air. And CNN has now retracted, removed the story, and issued a very brief apology buried where nobody can actually see it. But that's basically the idea of what's going on here. Over at Salon, they're literally out there declaring that the 60 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump are racists and a threat to democracy. Really? I thought voting for the president was an exercise in democracy. Apparently, over at Salon and the Church of Liberalologists, democracy means you vote for the people we tell you to vote for. We told you to vote for Hillary Clinton. We had all kinds of headaches with Democrats who wanted Bernie Sanders, and we had to deal with them, and then we got to deal with every American because they don't want to vote for him. What's wrong with you people? Now, as you know, everybody's making a big stink. Did Russia influence the election? Did they try and influence this and that? Last September, when Hillary was still campaigning, and somebody asked her who her favorite world leader was, and she said it was German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And maybe it's just because it's a chick thing, or it may have been because at that time the German government was pouring millions of dollars into the Clinton Foundation at the cost of the German taxpayers, who are also being asked to pick up the debt slack for the other member states of the European Union, as well as pay for all the social net safety net for all those refugees coming on in there. Apparently, about $5 million. Now, Die Welt actually posed the question, was Chancellor Merkel trying to influence the outcome of the U.S. presidential election? Nobody's making a stink about that. Apparently, it's okay if Germany wants to influence the U.S. elections and politicians. It's okay if Britain or France or Saudi Arabia or especially Israel wants to influence the U.S. elections. That's just fine and dandy. But if Russia does it, that means war. We ran a poll on our website, a study in foregone conclusions. Do you believe the government's claim that Russia hacked the U.S. elections? 99% no. And for those who voted yes, I have to wonder, what the heck are they doing on my website? Probably monitoring it for various sundry groups and so forth and so on. Now, in a recent interview, Julian Assange came on out and said, to nobody's surprise, that the corporate social media that exists today, Facebook, and Twitter and so forth, are plugged into CIA and used for monitoring Americans, which I find to be utterly ridiculous. Social media is not going to get you reliable intelligence. People lie on social media, especially if they're trying to find a hot date for the weekend. The presentations that you find on social media in large part are not how people really are, but how they want to be, how they want the world to think they are. Think they're richer, think they have more possessions, think they're more important in the scheme of things. The only information on terrorists to be found on Facebook is usually planted there to frame some poor patsy in the eyes of the public, which brings me to the fact that over at Facebook, there is a website with the same name as this guy they just arrested at Fort Lauderdale, Esteban Santiago. And it's only a week old, and there is nothing in it. No photos, no posts, no nothing, no profile picture. But it was started a week ago. That'll give you pause for thought. Now, Assange came on out and responding to criticisms, you want to destroy America, you want to do this and do that. I said, no, we're publishing the emails to give the American people the true information on the power elites, and that is legitimate. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as I mentioned before we went to the commercial break, in a recent interview, Julian Assange was responding to the usual screaming of, you're trying to destroy the country with all this, by explaining that WikiLeaks published these DNC and Podesta emails to allow the American people to learn what the candidate and the candidate supporters are really like. And that's perfectly legitimate. We're not supposed to choose our leaders on the basis of how well they dress or how well they present when they're on TV. Character is how a person behaves when they think nobody's looking. And that's the true measure of the individual. Anybody can look really good and sincere and convincing on camera or behind a podium for short intervals of time. And that's okay for TV and movies. But when we're dealing with electing our leadership, we need to know. We have a right to know what these people are really like. And that's what WikiLeaks was doing. And we have seen time and again where after a presidency has turned into a disaster for the American people, we find out the president wasn't really the person that the corporate media presented to us. And media packaged, for example, Sarah Palin, who was clearly not qualified to be where she was. But she looks good. We'll get people to vote for her. That's the job of the corporate media, to sell you the president. And we have a right to know what these people are really like. Hillary looks really good when she's in public, behind the podium, on camera. Then we find out after the fact she's got a terrible temper. She throws things at people. She physically attacked John Podesta on election night when it became obvious she'd lost. We have a right to know these things, and that's what WikiLeaks was doing. We're going to take a phone call now. Van in North Carolina. Aloha, Van. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Calling in about Senator Songbird McCain.
Okay.
I'm really fed up with this guy. I mean, we saw his little speech yesterday about an act of war, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I'm surfing YouTube today and come across a video that Gary Frenchie, I believe his name is, on Next News Network. They've uncovered an audio recording of McCain when he was in Vietnam and how he was kissing up to the North Vietnamese, saying that he was the aggressor and he was wrong, and when he was in the hospital, what wonderful care that they gave him, and blah, 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 and, just kissing up. And then he gets on national TV and sticking his chest out, trying to get a lot of young guys and girls in trouble. And it just galls me to no end.
Well, McCain, I think, is a perfect example of somebody whose public image is completely opposite what the reality is. He came back from Vietnam. He was being promoted as a hero for resisting the torture and not cooperating with North Vietnam. And that audio recording supposedly was misfiled so nobody could find it. But he was actually facing a treason charge when he came back. Because his fellow POWs were saying, yeah, he cooperated. The North Vietnamese treated him great. They gave him a nice room and good food and everything because he was making these recordings for him. And McCain denied it, and the only reason it didn't move forward at that point was Richard Nixon issued a blanket pardon to all the returning POWs, which technically it's illegal. I actually agreed with it because, of what they've been through. But McCain shouldn't have been presented as a hero, but he comes from a very powerfully connected family. His father was a Navy admiral who basically was in charge of the American side of the cover-up of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And there's a story going around that McCain, when he was fooling around on the flight deck of a carrier, was doing what were called wet starts, where they'd hit the fuel into the engine and then wait a few seconds, then hit the ignition, which would blow this big blast of flame out the back of the plane that the pilots apparently thought was really cool, calling it a wet start. And apparently there was an incident where the flame touched off some of the weaponry on the plane right behind McCain and started a major fire on the carrier. And he was just hustled off the aircraft because he was the son of an admiral and we've got to protect our own. And that's been the McCain family tradition. protectors of Israel and very powerfully protected and connected. And again, somebody wrote on in the other day and said, I can't believe the people of Arizona are stupid enough to keep electing this guy over and over again. And I said, I don't think the people of Arizona are that stupid, because election fraud is not reserved just for the presidential races.
Yeah, well, I understand, he's a scumbag, and he was doing what he had to do, but to just be galled to think about sending people into harm's way, and with no regard whatsoever. You can't have any morals at all.
Well, these top-level elites, they look at soldiers as pieces on a giant game board. Remember what Henry Kissinger said, and I'm paraphrasing here, military men are just dumb, stupid pawns to be used for foreign policy. And, it's expected. They're going to be killed, they're going to be crippled, that's what they're there for. And it's certainly a very cold-hearted attitude. But people with that attitude are the ones who rise to the top, because they're willing to sacrifice others to achieve their own ends.
Yeah, I'm 65. I didn't go to Vietnam myself, but I had friends get killed over there, and it's just a detriment to their memory that something like that came back.
I absolutely agree. But McCain was cooperating with the North Vietnamese. He wasn't treated anywhere near as bad as his public legend claims that he was. And a lot of the POWs who were there with him, when they try and speak out, they're silenced.
Right. Changing the subject real quick, did you see the CNN video where the reporter was laughing about the 18-year-old, and they switched the camera to her real quick, and she changed her expression?
You're talking about the incident in Chicago?
Right, where they were torturing an 18-year-old kid that was mentally handicapped.
Yes.
They had a CNN reporter that she was off camera while they were showing the clip, and she was laughing, and when they switched the camera back, they caught her laughing before she realized the camera had switched back. And then she switched back to her serious mode.
There are there's a lot of videos like that. There's the one where they caught Bill Clinton coming out of Ron Brown's funeral, and he's laughing and joking, and he spots the camera, and he instantly goes into tearful mode. And then there was the one about the supposed father at Sandy Hook coming out to be interviewed, and he's laughing and joking, and then he gets over there, and you see him go through this actor's exercise to get down and looking sad and be upset and traumatic, and these videos get out there, and they're just absolute visual proof that all of this stuff coming out of the corporate media is just a total con job.
Yeah, it is. And, well, you do a great job, my man, and you keep up the good work, okay?
All right, thank you very much. I will certainly do that. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, as you know, in the course of this whole war between the corporate media and the independent media, the corporate media is trying to get on this idea of the fake news and how they should be allowed to determine what is real and what is fake, and Facebook's pulling together these groups that are going to be the impartial arbiters of what's real and fake news, and of course they're all liberal organizations. Snopes was a huge embarrassment to them. Apparently there's a big embezzlement scandal over there. One of their fact checkers is a former call girl, and the latest embarrassment now is the Internet Wayback Machine, which apparently moved their servers to Canada out of concern that the new Trump administration would censor the content on the Internet, which is ridiculous. We know it's the current regime and corporate media and governments that want to censor the Internet. Donald Trump sees the independent media as his friend, and he's not going to do anything about it. But now that they're in Canada, Wayback has now added a new section to their website. It's a Donald Trump video library complete with fact-checking, where they will tell you, and you will believe, because it's the Internet Wayback Machine, that Donald Trump is lying about this, and Donald Trump is lying about that, and Donald Trump. So Wayback Machine is obviously just as politically compromised, and they have flushed their credibility down the loo. Fortunately, there are now other Internet archive sites that you can avail yourself of, just like we're all dropping Facebook and going to Scene Life, dropping Twitter and going to Gab and the rest of it. All these old guard gatekeeper institutions are being abandoned. And we're already starting to hear rumblings from employees and certainly ex-employees in a lot of these concerns that they're already resorting to inflating their membership numbers to keep their ad revenues up. Now, speaking of ratings and numbers, apparently Good Morning America had an interview with Megyn Kelly talking about the Roger Ailes scandal, sexual harassment, and they thought it was going to be a huge ratings draw. And apparently it was a huge disappointment for ABC because people actually just didn't bother tuning in. Apparently didn't even want to listen to Megyn Kelly anymore. So they're in serious trouble over there. Here's a little odd story that you're going to hear on the independent media, and as far as I can tell, corporate media is not covering it yet. Apparently in upstate New York, there was a guy, Justin Barkley, 38, who killed a UPS driver that he thought was Donald Trump. In fact, he's still convinced that the person he killed was the president-elect. Obviously a product of Common Core or too many prescription antidepressants. But this idea of somebody killing somebody he thought was Donald Trump, you think would be big news, but it isn't. Now, Donald Trump is on Twitter again, communicating directly with you, the American people, and he's asking a very cogent question. Just how did NBC get this exclusive look into the top secret report that was presented to Obama, supposedly about the Russian hacking the election? Who gave them the report and why? Well, politics as usual, but there's another situation. Nobody at NBC is cleared to look at that material. Some of it supposedly is special access compartmented. Whoever gave NBC that report is now technically guilty of espionage. Title 18 violations. Now, getting on back to that horrible incident in Chicago on the video, Obama is basically dismissing it, saying, nothing. Race relations aren't getting worse. They have gotten horribly worse this last year. And it's all because of the intentional race baiting and fanning up of racial tensions of setting blacks against whites as part of the Hillary Clinton campaign and as part of the campaign of keeping the American people fighting with each other rather than uniting together and realizing that the real cause of all the misery the people of the United States are suffering comes from Washington, D.C. It's an old trick. They've played it before. Back in the 1960s, the FBI ran an operation called COINTELPRO. And one of the things that it did, and it was all illegal at the time, was to deliberately try and fan up race hatred between whites and blacks, because whites and blacks have been getting together in opposition to that war in Vietnam. And they didn't want the American people standing up and demanding an end to the war in Vietnam, so they said, well, we'll just turn them against each other. And they played all kinds of dirty tricks, one of which was the infamous Black Panther coloring book. This was a coloring book. It wasn't even really a good coloring book. It was more sketches as opposed to enclosed zones that you would color in, but you get the idea. And this was something supposedly the Black Panthers had created and were giving to inner city children, and it contained these horrible pictures of blacks killing whites, and all the police officers were drawn as pigs, and it was very inflammatory. And amazingly enough, I was living in West Covina with my parents at the time, very white neighborhood, and we got one in the mail, and I couldn't figure why did somebody send this to us? And the corporate media was out there saying, oh, the Black Panthers did this. And then in the 1970s, the COINTELPRO scandal exploded, where these individuals literally broke into an FBI office and got the files of COINTELPRO and leaked them to the media, showing that the FBI was engaging in all of these black operations that had nothing to do with crime, nothing to do with terror, everything to do with suppressing Americans' right to freedom of speech and expressing their concerns about the war in Vietnam. And buried in those records was the revelation that the Black Panther coloring book was a product of the FBI. Your tax dollars at work. Congress was forced to hold hearings because the exposure of this modern-day Gestapo in the middle of our country, operating apparently with the blessing of the entire U.S. government, brought the U.S. government to the edge of illegitimacy. And so Congress got all huffy and puffy, and they passed a bunch of laws saying, you FBI can't do this anymore. And then during the Clinton administration, those laws were very quietly rescinded. Just like in 2013 where they rescinded the law against using propaganda on the American people, which tells you the direction the U.S. government has been going. But that's what this is all about, keeping us angry with each other, keeping the blacks and whites more worried about each other than the government, keeping the gays and the straights hostile towards each other, keeping men and women hostile towards each other. So they're not looking at what the government is doing. Divide and conquer. They were doing it back in the 1990s with the militant feminism. And they're doing it again today. Now, Shepard Smith was interviewing a reporter about the attack, the torture up in Chicago. And the reporter started talking about this appears to be a product of all this Black Lives Matter racism. Shepard Smith just cuts him right off and says, we're not going to talk about the political meanings of this, just stay, because that's really what's going on, and that's what the corporate media has to protect. It was the intentional race baiting by the government, by the political campaign of Hillary Rodham Clinton, that created this environment where blacks seem to feel this is okay, this is acceptable behavior. It's okay to torture white people. It's okay to torture Trump supporters. That's the real root of all of this, and they're trying to conceal that. And I think that's probably why the Chicago police initially, under Mayor Rahm Emanuel, were so quick to say, it's just no big deal. And the public outcry, led by the independent media, is why now they've reclassified it as hate crimes, as they should have. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently the declassified version of this report on Russia hacking the American election has been released. It's a PDF. I just linked to it to WhatReallyHappened.com. And in scanning through it, it's rumor and innuendo and absolutely nothing else, with a footnote saying that, honestly, we really do have proof. We can't show it to you. You're just going to have to take our word for it. No, actually, we don't have to do any such thing. Because these are the same intelligence agencies who told us all Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And, in many cases, the same individuals, including Clapper himself, who admitted his fingerprints were all over the report that said Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. So with a batting average like that, why would we listen to these people? So, anyway, getting on back to Chicago, there's already the beginnings of a bit of a backlash, and I'm concerned about that. I would like this to just go away. I think those 4 individuals who did this need to go away for a very, very long time. But there's an article that came on out from Regano.com basically saying don't make yourself a target for predators, be ready, be aware, and they're talking about situational awareness, just being aware of where you are, who's around you, and just develop that. A lot of people walking around shopping malls and everything, they're just kind of turned in, they're looking at their electronic devices, they're really not plugged in to the immediate environment. And you need to start thinking like that because it is a hostile environment for a wide variety of reasons. And invest in some pepper spray and just develop a really good sense of self-preservation because it's needed right now. Clearly, the police are not going to protect you. They're too busy with their civil forfeiture nonsense. They certainly didn't protect this individual in Chicago. He was tortured for 48 hours. They certainly didn't stop that shooter down in Fort Lauderdale until he'd run out of bullets. Then they arrested him. So just like you need to take responsibility for your own privacy, you need to take responsibility for your own protection. One of the problems we actually have here in Hawaii, and I understand why it happens, but it does happen. We'll have people who will come here from major cities on the U.S. mainland, where they're normally on guard because they're in high-crime areas. And they come here and they believe the postcards and the brochures that this is a tropical paradise, and in many ways it is. But certainly here on the island of Oahu, Honolulu is a big city with all the problems of a big city. And a lot of tourists get robbed and scammed under circumstances where, had they been back home, they would have known better. Now then, let's turn to the war zones, emphasis on the plural. ISIS is suffering major casualties all across Syria. 120 ISIS members killed, 10 units of hardware destroyed. More about the Syrian war when we come back from our station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And let me just get this out of the way. Now then, we're talking about the war zones. Heavy casualties inflicted on ISIS, 10 units of military hardware destroyed by the Syrian army. And at this point, it looks like ISIS has given up. They did briefly withdraw from the area around Taiz Air Base. Apparently they regrouped and are trying to go back in there, but the Syrian army is holding them at bay. Certainly it looks like right now Vladimir Putin has decided that the war in Syria is pretty much over because they're starting to pull some of their forces out of Syria, and they have ordered the aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, and its battle group to head back to their home port in Severomorsk. Now, this could be because Putin thinks the war is over, or Putin may be aware that the U.S. is trying to provoke a war with Russia and is going to get Russia's forces out of the Syrian theater in order to forestall that. Remember, Putin's a chess player. He thinks things through very, very carefully. Our political leadership is all about poker and hearts and bluffing and bluster and chest thumping, which is why our foreign policy has been such a disaster for decades here. Okay, we're going to go ahead and grab a quick phone call from Brian in Georgia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Happy New Year. I was just going to had something to say about Jews and Arabs as far as like them being these centuries-old conflict between them, because looking at what Rahm Emanuel is doing in Chicago and what Merkel is doing to Germany, it seems like almost that Jews and Arabs have become allies against, I guess, the rest of the world, for lack of a better word, the Christian world, where they
hang on. I think you're being a bit premature, okay? First of all, throughout history, alliances are always changing. Okay, and what was true today is not necessarily going to be true a year ago. During the 1400s, 1490s, 1500s, during the time of the Inquisition, when Jews were being persecuted by the Christians of Europe, the Arabs willingly took them in. And Jews and Arabs lived peacefully all across the Middle East for quite a long time. Until some political leaders decided, I can make more money and gain more power by turning these people against each other. And so what the FBI did to blacks and whites in this country in the 60s, what they tried to do again last year, you're going to see that throughout history, where you'll have a group of people who are living together in peace and harmony, and somebody's going to come along and start whispering in ears about, how those people over there, they're really evil, they're coming to steal your money or your sheep or your women or whatever, and then they'll go over the other side and say, these people are starting to really look at you kind of funny, and if I were you, I'd buy some weapons, which I will loan you the money to do. And so it's a drastic oversimplification to say that Jews and Arabs have been at each other's throats for all this time. What I find really amazing is that Christians and Jews and Muslims would be enemies in the first place, because all of those religions go back to a single point source of Abraham. But it's an interesting thing when you're looking at a religion that grows and grows until it splits, and all of a sudden there's competition for those collection plates. And that's where a lot of this religious violence starts to originate. Where all of a sudden somebody who had a big church is now one of two smaller churches, and they get very upset because the money's being cut off. We had the original Judaism from Abraham, then the Christians split off, then the Muslims split off from then the Muslims split into Sunni and Shiite, and it always represents a loss of revenue to whoever's in control of the religion prior to the split. when the Catholics declared war on the Cathars, one of the reasons they did that, there were a couple of different reasons. One of the reasons they did that was the Cathars did not think their Christianity was the property of the Catholic Church and refused to pay the Catholic Church's taxes. Back then, literally, the Catholic Church imposed a direct tax on everybody who was a Christian. And the Cathars did not think that the Roman Catholics owned their version of Christianity because they had inherited that version of Christianity directly from Jesus' family and not from this apostolic descent thing. And the Catholics wound up exterminating one-third the population of southern France during those wars.
Wow. Yeah, politics and religion.
Well, they're two faces of the same coin. You know, greed and power.
Yeah.
And the lust, therefore. Okay?
Yeah, fine.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to do a quick shout-out now to the network affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, one indication that the world is seeing the Syrian conflict as drawing to a close is the French delegation has now arrived in Damascus. Apparently, the liberation of Aleppo seems to be the signal that the 5-year-long U.S. attempt to overthrow Assad and replace him with a puppet regime is now over. And things are going to start going back to normal. It'll take a while, because the U.S. government tends to act like a spoiled brat in such things. But that's a very significant signal. And that may be also another reason why Putin is pulling his forces back. They're not needed there anymore. He's going to take them back home in case they're needed elsewhere. The short version is the U.S. just lost the war in Syria. And this is our biggest military defeat since Vietnam. It goes on Obama's legacy, not Trump's. And with any luck, it's going to bring to an end this agenda of trying to conquer the world's resource-rich areas and shackle them to the U.S. dollar. And maybe we'll avoid World War III getting any worse than it already is. Maybe we'll avoid mushroom clouds. I would dearly like to avoid mushroom clouds. I've got a first-strike nuclear target right out that window. Anyway, moving along here. Speaking of acting like a spoiled brat, apparently 11 civilians were killed and 35 injured in a terrorist, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more bombing in Jabla City near Latakia. And interestingly enough, Iran has signaled to Lebanon that they are ready to support and arm the Lebanese army. So the dynamics of the Middle East are starting to change here. We are still at risk, though, of Obama trying to start a war directly with Russia because he's got this Operation Atlantic Resolve against Russia. And they've sent something like almost 4,000 tanks along that border with Russia. Massive NATO deployment. And they're always at, well, we have to counter Russian aggression. Where was Russia aggressive? That's the amazing thing. Talk about Orwellian double talk. Russia's not the problem here. Russia's the only adult in the geopolitical room right now. If there were Russian tanks massing on the Canadian side of our northern border or the Mexican side of our southern border, if there were Russian battle groups sailing around the Gulf of Mexico, you might have a valid point that Russia's being aggressive. But they're not. But it looks like there's an effort between all this nonsense about Russia hacking and active war and cyber threat of trying to actually start a war with Russia and get it going and established before Trump can come on in and throw cold water on the whole idea. The fatal flaw in their reasoning, as far as I can see, is they're convinced that if they can start the war, Donald Trump will feel he's got no other choice but to continue it. And I think Trump could easily fool them, because he is a political outsider. He's a businessman, not a career politician. And because of that, he's not as obsessed with his historical legacy as career politicians, like Obama, who's already trying to rewrite the history of his administration, awarding himself medals and decorations. Trump could get into office and call up Putin and say, let's knock this off. And Putin's going to say yes immediately. Neither one of them want a war. They've got other things to deal with. Just as a little reminder, our Nobel Peace Prize president dropped a total of 26,171 bombs last year. It's an amazing year. Meanwhile, the U.S. House of Representatives has shown that, unfortunately, there are still way too many Israel firsters in those offices, and we got to look at starting to get some of those out 2 years from now. And apparently they passed a resolution, House Resolution 11, which is a obviously non-binding resolution, calls for the United Nations Security Council resolution that was passed a week ago to be repealed or altered so that it's no longer one-sided and anti-Israel. Well, there's a little bit of a problem. Palestine isn't building illegal settlements in Israel, are they? This issue is one-sided because Israel made it one-sided. This House Resolution 11 is also demanding that the U.S. block any actions that are going to be taken at the Paris conference scheduled for January 15th. Don't you dare let them form a Palestinian state. Now, at this point, I am sick to death and fed up with all of these politicians who are supposed to be working for the United States government, who are paid by the United States taxpayers, and they're running around saying, oh, we have to serve Israel, we have to do this, we have to do that. And I know this is an area where Donald Trump and I are not going to see eye to eye, but I think time will cure that particular problem. But let's grab all these members of Congress who are out there worried about Israel and Israel this and that. Let's crate them up, and this time we got to remember to put the air holes in those boxes. And then we ship them to Tel Aviv, because it's very obvious they're not interested in actually being American politicians or American leaders. We're looking at all these countries around the world who are kicking out foreign puppet rulers, like is happening in Libya and Yemen right now. We need to recognize we are also under foreign puppet rule when we see all these politicians who are out there saying, oh, we must serve Israel, we must serve Israel, we must do this, we must give them more money, and all the rest of that stuff. Nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. As long as we have a single American sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash dumpsters, this government has no business and no right to send a single penny of America's tax money to foreign governments. We're going to take a phone call. James in South Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I got a question about gold.
Yes.
Back in 1971, that's a long time ago, when Nixon took us off the gold standard.
Yes.
Did he have an option from doing that? I mean, it doesn't look like to me there was anything else he could do.
No, he was pretty much cornered. There really wasn't anything that he could do because the Federal Reserve, which is not actually a part of the government, was not constrained or did not feel they were constrained by the Bretton Woods Agreement to not overprint dollars. And when France decided that they wanted to send back that huge stack of paper dollars they had and change them for gold at the agreed-upon price of $32 per ounce of gold, Nixon looked in Fort Knox and realized they couldn't even begin to cover that. And so the only thing they could do was to delink gold from the dollar, which was actually something the bankers wanted to happen anyway, because they didn't want any ties between their imaginary money and some kind of a fixed commodity, because it limits their ability to just create new money out of thin air. And it did upset the world markets. It was called the Nixon shock. And the major crisis it provoked was that those countries that had loaned money to the U.S. government or were about to were all of a sudden very concerned that there wasn't enough gold to cover the collateral obligations of the United States. And so at that point, Richard Nixon formed the Environmental Protection Agency, which their real purpose, under the guise of saving the environment for the future, was to start grabbing huge chunks of land, which is illegal under the Enclave Clause of the Constitution, and lock them away from the American people, including their mineral resources, to pledge as collateral on government borrowing. And now the federal government owns about 1/4 of the entire nation. And they're not supposed to do that. It's unconstitutional for them to do that. But that's been the real purpose, and they hide the scale of the land theft under all these different named programs: heritage rivers, wilderness zones, roadless areas, wetlands, and so forth and so on, so that when you look at any one of these programs, it doesn't look like they've grabbed all that much land. But when you put it all together, it's almost 1/4 of the nation now. And, of course, Obama has just added to that with these massive national monuments he's declared. And
how is that secured?
How is what secured?
The land. I mean, if somebody wants to, they can't reclaim gold. How do they reclaim the land or the minerals? I mean, has this ever been done?
No, it hasn't yet, because the U.S. has not yet defaulted. But basically, what it means is, in the event of a U.S. default, and unless somebody stands up and makes the case that the U.S. government acted in bad faith by pledging as collateral something they were not legally entitled to own, then the position of these other countries is going to be, well, we now own this piece of land in your country, and we're allowed to mine or drill or whatever for those natural resources. When Clinton created the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument, underneath it is a huge reserve of low-sulfur coal. Technically, Clinton actually violated Utah's statehood agreement by doing that. But if we're not careful, we're going to wake up one day as tenants on this land, because it's being taken away from us bit by bit by bit by our own government. And it is illegal and unconstitutional for them to do it, but they keep on doing it because the courts all work for them. And corporate media is going to say, oh, this is a really good thing. Yes, that all you Americans, you're going to have to live down here in this little tiny piece of the corner of the country because the rest of the country now belongs to your, bankers in Europe and bankers in Asia and bankers in Saudi Arabia.
Well, would you say that the dollar now then, I mean, if it's secured with the land, it's not really a true fiat dollar, is it? It's something kind of a hybrid, is it not?
Well, you're mixing apples and oranges here, because when the U.S. government borrows from other countries, they're not borrowing dollars. They're borrowing other hard currencies that they use for trade and foreign exchange at whatever the current rates are. The U.S. paper dollar is backed up by Americans' slave labor, because the way the scam works is the U.S. Treasury, instead of printing up currency, prints up a Treasury bond. They send that piece of ink and paper over to the Federal Reserve, which then issues the equivalent as Federal Reserve notes, either real paper notes, which they actually contract back to the Treasury Department to actually print, or just by typing numbers into a computer. Now, the only thing that redeems those Treasury bonds are future tax revenues, which means every Treasury bond out there represents a promise by the U.S. government that they are going to take money away from you and give you back nothing in exchange for it. And that basically, when they take your labor and don't give you anything for it, that's slavery. And that's what backs up the Treasury bonds. The problem is they've overprinted the Treasury bonds as well. There's a Treasury bond bubble out there. There aren't enough Americans, even at 80 to 90% tax rates, to ever redeem all that paper. Maybe somebody thought flooding illegal immigrants and refugees into this country would create a workforce that could generate the revenues to make good on the Treasury, but most of these people aren't getting jobs. They are, in fact, a further burden on the existing taxpayers. And this is what I mean by people not really thinking things all the way through. And maybe they don't want to, because when you think about the long term of the United States, it's not a positive image. Anyway, James, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm just checking in on the corporate media here. And, of course, everybody's talking about the shooting in Florida, these Senate hearings trying to blame Russia for waxy yellow buildup, or whatever it is they're trying to do, have vanished because they weren't working. And again, just going over the info, there's very, very little. Still no talk about what a motive is. Does it qualify as an act of terror? Seems like it. Now they're talking about whether or not Obama and the governor of Florida have spoken with each other. Why would this escalate to the national level? I'd like to know. Anyway, back to the economic news. Gold gained in all currencies in 2016. Analysts are expecting that gold will outperform the Standard & Poor's for the next several years, which is why the United States is now trying to pressure other countries like India to limit cash and to ban gold, to take away from you that last bit of freedom to be in charge of your own wealth. The model they seem to be heading toward is you will work and the banks and the government will take the profit from that work and we will let you have some of it back when you need to eat. They tried that system before, down on those antebellum plantations in the Deep South before the Civil War. Now, when this nation was started, money was actually precious metals. The metal in the coins was the money. The paper notes were claim checks only. They used to say you can take this paper note to the bank and get its equivalent face value in lawful money, because the lawful money was that silver or gold or nickel coin. And once you had that and put it in your pocket, there wasn't a thing the bankers or the government could do to change its value. And all that went away shortly after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, when they took the silver out of the coins and declared the ink and paper note to be the money and not a claim check anymore. And that transferred control over the value of the money in your pocket from you to the bankers and the government. But you still have the option of taking the money out of the bank or the stock market and putting it in your pocket or burying it in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. Now they want to take that away from you. There is a record 95,102,000 Americans not in the labor force. That's an 18% increase since Barack Obama took office. So Obama cannot say, in fact, that there was any kind of an economic recovery during his 2 terms in office. Yet the official government unemployment numbers are still in the single digits. It's magic. We're going to take a phone call. Andy in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. We're kind of living in an illusion society right now, whereas you and I, we like to believe that the Constitution has any bearing on what we're doing in this world right now, and yet it doesn't exist. It just simply doesn't exist. I mean, try to take a constitutional argument into a courtroom and see how far that gets you. I've done that. I've defended myself in court before, and they just continue to interrupt you every time you bring up any kind of constitutional event. And caution, sir, you're about to, you may incriminate yourself. And then they stop you several times. I mean, I was on a Fourth Amendment plea with these guys, and they had been violated, obviously had been violated, but they just kept cautioning me. They kept interrupting me.
Well, we know, okay, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're about to hit a commercial break. We know the courts are corrupt and everything, but the Constitution still exists as long as we, the people, say it is still the law of this land, and I will not obey or support any government that is not in compliance with that Constitution, and neither should you. Thank you for the call, Andy. We've got to let you go and take some commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're going to take a quick phone call, and then we're going to close the phone lines for the next half hour because I've got a lot of news to get through before the Lady Claire joins us. Brian in Illinois, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I would like to bring up a subject that's talked about much, and that's the institutions, by that I mean these federal agencies and security agencies and all those groups that are so now, I think, have gone rogue. And all of them, they're out of control. And whatever good they used to do, if there was any, I don't think the bad that they do now, the destructive, and it's really destructive effects of these agencies are now they've become powers within themselves, and the political power is I mean, 150 years ago or 170 years ago, you had men like John C. Calhoun. Whatever position that he took, he was kind of the center of it, and that doesn't exist today. Oh, what you have now is the Defense Department, or the Pentagon says this, or the Army says that, and I'm not so much concerned about those groups as these intelligence agencies, the rest of these government agencies that are basically out of control.
Okay, well let me step in here a little bit here. Okay, first of all, there's always been a problem with intelligence agencies who by their very nature are deceptive, concealing, lie. There's been a concern all along. Even while Bill Donovan, when he was first setting up OSS and then later pointing it in the direction of the CIA, expressed concern about there had to be adequate oversight or intelligence agencies do tend to go rogue. It's almost an inevitability. Harry Truman expressed a similar concern. Obviously, that Operation Screwworm out of Arkansas in the 1980s, where they were smuggling guns to Nicaragua and paying for it by smuggling in and selling cocaine to our kids, was not officially sanctioned by the U.S. government. But in the current case, because of the ongoing coordination, I think the establishment, maybe they've got an attitude like a rock star, where we're out of this room, let's wreck the place before we go. It seems like there is a high-level decision coming down from Obama himself to get a war with Russia going before Trump can take office in order to basically tie his hands and prevent him from bringing peace with Russia, peace with China. But the intelligence agencies do see themselves as set apart from people. And again, if you watch that movie Snowden that Oliver Stone did, a big part of the film is telling how Snowden came on in with these very high ideals and noble intentions, and just as he saw this attitude within NSA of, who cares about the Fourth Amendment? We're here to spy on people, and that's what we do, and we're having fun, and it's cool, and we're high-tech. Or if you go back... well, there have been several movies on the same topic. But there is that elitist attitude when you're in one of these agencies. When J. Edgar Hoover, hang on a second, please. When J. Edgar Hoover was running the FBI, he literally called his own office at the FBI the seat of the government, because he had to blackmail goods on everybody with his secret files, which disappeared when he died or was assassinated. Nobody ever knows where that information went. Anyway, listen, Brian, I got to let you go because we got to close the phone lines. I got a lot of stuff to get through and only little time to get through it. So thank you very much for the phone call. And yes, the intelligence agencies do go rogue. Their very nature is being concealing, and very often they're working at cross purposes. We're talking about the economy. The U.S. car recession is spreading among the largest automakers. They may be screaming for bailouts yet again. Think about all the way back in 2008, where the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud started this huge economic decline. And what did the U.S. government do? They didn't jail the crooked bankers. They took trillions of dollars from the American people and they gave them to these banks that had done this fraud and caused the problem, So those bankers could then loan that money back to us at interest. Swell deal for the banks. And, of course, for those members of Congress invested in those financial institutions, it basically saved their portfolios. Now, had the government done exactly the opposite, if they'd gone after these Wall Street banks, taken trillions from them, and given them to the American people, especially those who were harmed by the real estate frothing, the predatory mortgages, the false foreclosures and everything, then Americans would have had enough money to keep paying their mortgage payments. There wouldn't have been a mortgage crisis. They would have had money to buy new homes. Wouldn't be a real estate crisis. They would have had money to go on down to the shopping mall and buy all kinds of products, hopefully made in America. Wouldn't have been a retail crisis. And they would have been buying new American-made cars that wouldn't have had to bail out the automotive giants. What the U.S. government did in response to the meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008 was absolutely the wrong thing to do for the good of the nation as a whole. All it did was serve the special interests, the rich and the powerful. And now, of course, if you look at the car commercials on TV right now, the deals are just amazing. If I actually had money, I would be running down to the dealership right now. But that's the problem. When you take all the money in a society and you pile it up on the elites, there's nothing left for the economy to function with. And that's where we are right now. It's all locking up here. Article we're looking out of the Organic Prepper. They're calling it Retail Apocalypse 2017. We've already been talking about how Macy's is going to be closing a whole bunch of stores. Sears is going to be closing Sears and Kmart stores. Hundreds of stores are going to be closing because, contrary to all the media hype and those staged sales riot videos where they have a bunch of actors screaming and beating each other up to get through the doors on Black Friday, the Christmas sales and everything, to get you all whipped up and say, you better get down here before the bargains are gone. It's all about pushing product. Nobody had money for this Christmas. Everybody was baking. I made you a banana bread for Christmas. Oh, I love banana bread. That's great. And we're already hitting the point where all of the seasonal workers, the temporary help for the holiday shopping season, are being let go. So next month's job numbers are going to be really, really bad. And thousands of non-seasonal, theoretically permanent long-term jobs are now being cut. Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year. January is the exact opposite. So let's take a moment here to talk about human-caused global warming. And apparently over in Boise, Idaho, they have set an all-time snow record. In fact, it beat the last record by 2 inches, but that last record was set in 1983 and then tied in 1985, and they just beat it. All-time record snowfall there. Meanwhile, Europe is really getting hammered. They're dealing with super cold weather. Temperatures are below zero, heavy snowfalls all over. Remember the other day we were talking about ski resorts in Montana had to close because it's too cold to ski. The wind chill factor was minus 40. You start at the top of that ski slope and shoos down, you're an ice cube by the time you reach the bottom. Remember what we were saying about Old Faithful Geyser in Yellowstone? The water coming out of that boiling geyser is freezing as soon as it leaves. It's a snow geyser. California is about to be hit with a major, major storm. They're calling it a once-in-10-year storm. And they're looking at major blizzards, along with the possibility of flooding and avalanches. So there's an article that came out over at dailycaller.com about the top 5 failed snow-free and ice-free predictions. And obviously that March 20th, 2000 prediction in the UK Independent, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. That was one of them. Ski resorts will go out of business. That was another one. Remember in 2009, the UK Met Office predicted a snow-free winter for Britain, and they got hammered. photos from space just showed the British Isles totally white. It almost looked like a painted globe rather than the real world. And all of the global warming people are on the defensive once again saying, well, you know, one exceptionally cold and snowy winter does not disprove global warming. Except that we have had several record-setting winters in a row. And because the motto of the U.S. government and the corporate media is, if at first you don't succeed, lie again, they're still out there trying to say, the world is warming. You're warming the world. We've got to tax carbon. We don't care if it's freezing where you are. We're the government. We're the media. We know what's best. Now, over at Natural News, which is one of the independent media websites that has come under attack by the corporate media because they're telling the truth about things like GMO and vaccinations here. They published their list of the top 10 most outrageous science hoaxes of 2016. Human-caused global warming obviously made the cut, along with the Zika virus terror campaign. And it turned out Zika was no big deal, and they killed off millions and millions of honeybees in the process. Another one that was on the list was scientific political polling, which assured us all Hillary Clinton was going to win in a landslide victory. We're entering a period that I think Tacitus described accurately when he said, the more laws you have, the more corrupt your society has become. And along that same topic is an article over at the Rutherford Institute. The Titanic sails at dawn, warning signs point to danger ahead in 2017. And they're talking about things like mandatory quarantines without due process, mandatory vaccinations and treatment, mental health assessments by non-medically trained personnel. There's a nationwide push to have pastors, teachers, hairstylists, bartenders, police officers, to basically do a diagnosis of you to see if you're having a mental health issue requiring confinement and hospitalization. California has proposed a new bill, Senate Bill 18, that makes it illegal for parents to make medical decisions about their own children. SB 18 will allow California to seize children away from their parents in their homes if parents make any medical decisions that the state deems to be not in the child's best interests, meaning in the best interests of the pharmaceutical corporations, the medical industrial complex. And this bill is authored by Dr. Richard Pan, who was also behind the mandatory vaccination bill. By the way, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, the DVD for the documentary Vaxxed is now available on eBay. I gave away all my copies. I had to buy some more, and instead of having to go to Amazon, I found them on eBay. So you can get them. It's become my standard present to any expecting family. You need to watch this. Interestingly enough, there's a very alarming story coming out of Brass Check TV. Apparently, seed libraries are now under attack. And you're probably asking, what's a seed library? Well, seed libraries are a very old tradition in farming country. We had them in New Hampshire when I was growing up. And basically what it was is at the end of the year and your harvest, you would harvest the seeds to grow next year's crops. And you might keep some of them in your barn, or you might join the seed library, which was a community-operated, safe storage area for the seeds. And then the next spring you'd go on in and you'd say, I need seeds for so much corn, so much potato, so much rutabaga, so much parsnips, carrots, and so forth. And you'd get your seeds and you'd go plant your garden. Well, now the government is pushing for a law that seed libraries, which are by and large nonprofit volunteer organizations, have to follow the same regulations as large seed corporations like Monsanto. And what's going on here is Monsanto can afford all this regulatory burden. Nonprofit volunteer seed libraries can't. They're trying to drive the seed libraries out of business. Monsanto's goal is to destroy hereditary heritage seed planting, to force everybody to buy their GMO seeds. And certainly the colony collapse disorder, which some scientists have now linked to GMO pollen, is part of that business plan, because if you don't have honeybees, you can't pollinate your plants. And I think this is another case of not thinking things all the way through, because if all food production is dependent on Monsanto and their GMO seeds, and Monsanto makes a mistake, or they go out of business, how do we grow next year's food? The seed libraries are shut down. It's enforced dependence on Monsanto for food. It's enforced dependence on the banks to manage your money for you. And enforced dependence is slavery. 4 more government officials have been charged in Flint over the water crisis, bringing the total to 13. And I think there needs to be investigations in other cities, because it's now come on out. Thousands of American cities actually have worse quality tap water than Flint does. Did that come about through the same political corruption? Well, we're going to save money by not putting certain chemicals into the water, not making it safe. We need to find that out. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is now back to pushing this thing about Russia's undermining our democracy and denigrating Hillary Clinton. Well, Hillary Clinton gave them a lot to denigrate her with. Let us all not lose sight of a fact. All of those emails, regardless of how they became public, were written by Hillary Clinton and her staffers. They wrote those things. They said those things. They did those things. Nobody's ever denied it happened. They're trying to kill the messenger here, whoever it was, and now they're trying to claim the messenger is Russia. Now, this declassified version of the intel report that came on out it's basically making a bunch of assertions with no backing. That Russia had a plan to denigrate Hillary Clinton, that they were going to blah, blah, blah. And again, the hypocrisy is stunning when you realize the CIA has admitted rigging elections in 81 other countries. And they're still pushing this as hard as they can. One of our listeners actually wrote on in with the suggestion that the timing of the Fort Lauderdale shooting was fortuitous because it gave the media a reason to not report on Donald Trump's response to all of this Russian hacking propaganda. But don't worry, we'll pick up the slack here in the independent media because that's what we're here for. Now then, getting into a little bit of science news as we hit the top of the hour, the world's biggest space telescope may be in trouble. The Super Hubble, otherwise known as the James Webb Space Telescope, has failed its latest test. They were doing a vibration test to make sure the telescope could actually withstand the vibration of the launch, and sensors shut it down. Now, the telescope was not damaged. They're going to make some changes and continue the vibration test. I think it's a good thing they're testing thoroughly. They really need to. Remember when the Hubble first went up and they opened the camera and it was out of focus? It was a failure of testing. They had done 2 tests on the components of the optical system, one of which said there's a problem with the curve on the main mirror. And the other one said the main mirror is fine. And NASA just said, well, we're going to throw out the report that says there's a problem and we'll just go with the one that says it's okay. Same thing they did with the labeled release experiment results on Viking. And they got into space. It couldn't see. They had to launch a shuttle mission to fix it. So at least they're testing a little bit more thoroughly. The one thing they never did on the original Hubble, and they had time to do it because the Hubble's launch was delayed because of the Challenger disaster, nobody ever thought to just take the lens cap off of the completed satellite and actually look through it electronically, which would have shown the problem right there, but they didn't do that. We're going to take a real quick phone call before the top of the hour. Bob in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Michael, I just want to tell you how much I like this show.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how much information I have gained since November 3rd. I was searching for somebody, because I met a guy at the laundromat, and he told me that I should get informed. I should look up. So I started searching around. I fell on your show. I've been watching it every day since. I got to tell you, I never knew. 95% of the stuff that you say, I never knew.
Well, thank you. Well, when you live as long as I have, you'll know as much as I do. That's what happens.
I don't know if that's going to work, but...
All right, well, Bob, I got to let you go. There's the music. We got to take a break for our station identification, and we'll be back with the lovely Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and the lovely Lady Claire is just now rushing in here to put her ears on. I'm going to pour her a little bit of water, and we'll get her microphone up here in just a little tiny bit. Meanwhile, I'm watching on the corporate media, and they're pushing this declassified version of the intelligence report, which, as I said before, it's all just assertions with nothing to back it up. And one of the assertions they're pushing is that Putin ordered a campaign to influence the U.S. election. And they've got nothing to back it up. And as I keep saying, and I even have a banner at the top of WhatReallyHappened.com right now, this Russia hacked the election is the 2017 version of Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. That's exactly what it is. And I would like to ask you all to make that idea go viral. Share it on all your social media. Russia hacking the election is the 2017 version of Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. Because that's what it is. It's the same people. The same intelligence agencies, the same individuals, Clapper among them, who gave us that lie about the dire threat posed by Saddam Hussein, and it turned out to be completely junk. And this is just more of the same thing, because they don't really know how any other way to get what they want, other than lies, fraud, and deception. Okay, we're going to bring up Claire's microphone, and what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing I want to talk about that has not been anywhere in the corporate prostitute media is that hundreds of U.S. tanks have arrived in Europe to support NATO anti-Russian buildup. Now, you learned on this site and from the radio show that we do have special ops forces in Lithuania. Now, this movement of tanks is allegedly in response to escalation by Vladimir Putin, who has been deploying nuclear-ready missiles in the Russian province of Kaliningrad, located at the heart of Central Europe. Allegedly, the Baltic states have become highly concerned about Russian military activity. And also, Mike, sometime during the spring of 2017, and we're already into January, NATO is expected to send battalions of 800 to 1,200 troops to each of the Baltic states and Poland. And this is one of the biggest NATO buildups since the Cold War. And, Mike, my question to you is, why would NATO be moving personnel and equipment that they don't intend to use?
Well, when you go back and you look at the Cold War, that was all about arms and troops that you were never really going to use because it gave all the participating nations an excuse to plunder the wealth of their people, to keep them poor, which keeps them from being a threat to the oligarchs, and just spend it all on these weapons that were very expensive and they didn't have to perform because it was expected they would never be used. You need to understand that all rulers want to keep their people as poor as possible because that's what keeps them helpless. If you look throughout history, all revolution has emerged from the middle classes who had the extra disposable income to fund political parties, movements, if necessary, revolutions. And so all tyrannical regimes try and prevent that middle class from having enough money to pose a threat to the established order. And what's going on with that is that's why they want to bring the Cold War back. That's why after the old Cold War ended, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the American people said, well, great, we get to keep more of our money now. Oh, no. Now we've got the war on poverty, and we've got the war on this, and we've got the war on global warming, and the war on terror, and we have to keep taking money away from you and building weapons with it.
And what I've noticed is every time the U.S. government declares war on something, it gets worse.
Yes.
It gets worse. This deployment does not augur well for peace in the region or the world. I have a sneaking feeling, and I'll get to that a little bit later, that the deep state is planning something very nasty in the not-too-distant future. I'd like to move over to the economy right now. And right now, a record 95,102,000 Americans are not in the labor force. Now, this number has grown 18% since Obama took office in 2009.
Unfortunately, I did mention that during
okay. All right. But that 18%, I mean, if he's going to talk about legacy, unfortunately, that's a big part of it. And did you talk about the Bureau of Labor Statistics and how they get to that 5-point-whatever unemployment figure?
I didn't go into the details of it this time.
Okay. What happens is that if a person has been out of work for 4 weeks and not gone on any job interviews because either the market is too tight or they just couldn't find anything, the Bureau of Labor Statistics just doesn't count those people. It's like those people don't exist. And that's pretty nasty.
It is very, very nasty,
Yeah.
but again, it's part of the maintaining of the illusion that everything is all hunky-dory, and you don't have a reason to be angry with the government. Just get worried about your neighbors. They may be different. We need to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network. And what is your next topic?
Anti-Russia fake news campaign rolled out across Europe, and now the EU is conflating Moscow and Russia as the sponsor of ISIS-Daesh.
Talk about the pot.
Oh, man.
Okay.
It's... The EU knows, and the leadership of the EU knows, that it's on its last legs. And the resolution that was passed on the 23rd of November of last year defines the main actors, Russia and Daesh, but it is Russia that occupies most of the resolution. The document equates Russia with transnational terrorist and criminal organizations that have repeatedly engaged in a strategy of deliberate deception.
Russia has a Death Star. Russia has a Death Star.
Yeah.
They have a laser beam thing.
Oh.
They've got all this terrible stuff. The utter absurdity of it is we have it from multiple sources, including official U.S. government documents, that it was the U.S. that created, trained, funded, and continued to support ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Hello. Yes, absolutely. So I've got a memo to the Eurocrats at the EU. With these accusations regarding Russia, you have really jumped the shark and become totally irrelevant and useless to the futures of the countries you allegedly represent. And to conflate Russia with ISIS? I mean, it's like these people have gone absolutely collectively crazy.
You know, what they're doing is they're thrashing around. They're not getting traction with any of their accusations against Russia because we all remember Saddam's nukes, Assad's sarin gas, Lusitania not carrying weapons, and on and on and on and on. And so we're not listening. And every time they put out a piece of propaganda and it doesn't work, their only response is, well, let's say something even worse.
Yes, and what these people need to do is collectively take their heads out of a very dark, unpleasant place and sniff a little sunshine. Russia is not the problem with the angst and agita that the people of Europe are feeling right now. It is the dissatisfaction of Europeans having to live with the regulations of the out-of-touch, tone-deaf, and blind EU Eurocrats in Brussels, which has caused a populist uprising by a very strong desire to break free of an economic and financial system which is great for the large corporate banking and taxing entities, but lousy for people who are living in the countries which comprise the EU.
Has anybody seen Juncker in public sober anytime recently?
Yeah, I haven't seen him in public much at all, to be perfectly honest.
He's got a good reason to be hiding on out there.
Yeah. And there is a real question of whether the European Union and the euro can actually survive. But Mike, and I'd like your input on this, my sense is without a major war fronted by NATO and the U.S. against Russia, it will ultimately have to collapse of its own weight, as the basic international understandings which created it were based on some false assumptions.
Well, you've hit the nail right on the head there, because the thinking that's going on in Washington, D.C. and in Brussels is, if we can get a really good war going, then the ordinary people, the deplorables, the flyovers, the serfs, the plebes, we'll forget all about the corruptions and the taxing and all the other abuse and everything, and they'll line up behind our flag and they'll give a snappy salute and they'll fling their babies onto the enemy's bayonets, because it's always worked in the past. But again, that kind of a tactic only works when the public is predisposed to believe and trust the government and the media, and they don't have that anymore.
And I would like to put the EU on notice. It has been the fake news regurgitated by corporate prostitutes to further government agendas worldwide, which gets people killed. Do any of those in the EU remember what happened after the U.S. government accused Saddam Hussein of having weapons of mass destruction? I rest my case.
Yes.
Yeah. Another thing that's not getting very much traction here, strikes are spreading in Mexico, and apparently thousands of police have been deployed to the capital to counter these arrests. And
Mike in the control room was actually feeding me information about it over the gasoline price hike, and there's major riots going on.
Oh, yeah. Apparently, President Nieto's cut to gas subsidies, known colloquially as the gasolino, have really infuriated the people of Mexico. One police officer has been killed in an impoverished neighborhood of Mexico City, and the mayor has deployed 900 police to guard commercial centers throughout the city.
Well, you know who they're already blaming for this? Donald Trump.
Yes, of course.
Because he's taking the Mexicans' jobs away and bringing them back to the United States and sending the refugee and the illegal immigrants back. And so we have to cut the gasoline subsidies, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and apparently 14,000 bus, truck, and taxi drivers in the oil-producing state of Veracruz announced a statewide strike of indefinite length, with many leaving their trucks, cabs, and buses parked on the streets. Now, the trade unions are trying to prevent the demonstrations from coalescing into national strikes. Trade union bureaucrats who announced the recent strike stated explicitly that they were forced to do so by their workers, who, in the words of one trade union official, are becoming violent. When people get desperate, hello, that's what happens.
Well, there's a trend here I would like everybody to pay attention to.
Yeah.
We started seeing way south, in South America, civil unrest as their economies began to unravel under the pressure of debt to the private central bankers. Now it's moving northward. Now it's in Mexico. There's only one more border before it gets here. And maybe that's another reason they're trying to start a war with Russia, so they can say, well, it's not our fault that you don't have food and gasoline. There's a war on. It's all Vladimir Putin's fault, and Vladimir Putin, as we know, is the illegitimate grandson of Adolf Hitler, and Satan, Satan's his uncle, and Cthulhu is his grandfather.
Yeah, but the question is, if Nieto does call in the federal troops, the Mexican federal troops, on whose side will those troops' loyalties lie? And I think that will probably determine the fate of what happens with these demonstrations.
Yeah, it's going to get very brutal there, and I'm not surprised the corporate media isn't paying a lot of attention to it, because, you know, it might give those American slaves uppity ideas.
Yeah, I think so. Another place that, again, is getting no corporate mention whatsoever is Yemen and the plight of the Yemeni children. What has happened since the 15th of March in 2015, the Saudis have been bombing the heck out of Yemen.
Thank you.
You are welcome. And there are certain things, and all of our friends who are former military understand this. There are so-called conventional rules of war. You don't hit hospitals, you don't hit schools, you don't, deliberately hit outdoor places where you've got innocent civilians.
Oh, well, every time those get hit, you know it's an accident. It was a mistake.
Yep.
We didn't mean to be killing all those people. We're the good guys.
And, Mike, I have to share this. When I was a kid coming up and living in very bucolic Burbank, California, I never thought in my wildest imagination that the United States would ever become complicit in war crimes. But fast forward to 2015, and that's exactly what they're doing. Collective punishment through starvation is a war crime.
Yes, it is.
The Saudis are preventing, because food has to be shipped in to Yemen because of the situation in the land, and the food's not getting through. Children are starving. Children are getting killed. And to understand that my government is complicit in the depth of this kind of war crime makes me very, very angry. And when President Trump does get inaugurated, I think we the people need to have a very sober conversation with his administration to see where the U.S. government is going to continue enabling these Saudi war crimes. And I say this because at the end of the day, the only real solution to the conflict has to be a political one. Has to be, ultimately.
Well, the U.S. does not want a political solution. The U.S. wants domination of the world's resource-rich areas to shackle the trade in those resources to the U.S. dollar. It really is that simple. This war is literally a war of currencies, of banking systems. The U.S. Federal Reserve and its Federal Reserve note against Russia's ruble and the Chinese yuan. And the U.S. government is clearly in a state of panic, and I think the realization that we've just lost Syria, or they've lost Syria, it wasn't my work, is only going to accelerate their panic. The fact that they're unable to get any traction on this Russia deal is going to put them into more of a panic. The corporate media is collapsing in the face of the independent media, and at this point they're feeling very cornered, and of course, as anybody who's a hunter knows, a cornered animal is always the most dangerous.
I hear you. I would like to bop over to some statements made by James Clapper.
Yes.
I'm going to sort of miss when he goes because you could almost use that last name as an epithet.
Yes.
Clapper!
Yeah.
But I digress.
We have a good dose of the Clapper.
Oh, heavenly Ned. Speaking to the Senate today, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper openly disagreed with President-elect Donald Trump on the narrative of the 2016 presidential election, insisting he was even more resolute that Russians had hacked the election and promised some evidence would be made public, maybe next week. Clapper claimed Russia had meddled in the U.S. election not just through alleged hacking of the Clinton campaign, but by spreading propaganda, saying that the existence of the state-run television station RT, that's Russia Today, you can find it online, rt.com, played a role in the election by disparaging our system. And then he went on to tongue-lash Donald Trump for being so vocal in questioning the allegations, saying that there was a difference between healthy skepticism and open disparagement of the intelligence community by not accepting their findings. Well, I have a memo to soon-to-be-retired Director of National Intelligence Clapper about your complaint that RT disparages our system. When I bob over there to read the English language version of their articles, there are articles that the U.S. prostitutes won't touch because they are geopolitical kryptonite in this country. For example, there was an article today about radioactive contamination in the shuttered Hanford site nuclear plant. It's spreading, and they put it on a back burner because
there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah.
And pay no attention to that glowing part of the country because it's not important anymore. If we can't make money off of it or get votes out of it, then it doesn't matter.
And a question I'd like to ask Mr. Clapper is, do Americans not have the right to be informed as to what's going on here and how it might be a threat to the water and soil in adjacent areas? And Mike, I checked CNN, NBC, Fox News, MSNBC, etc. Not a word on this unfolding catastrophe. And the reality, I think, is that if Clapper had hard evidence about Russian hacking, he would have been shouting it from the rooftops months ago. And I have found these assertions, which have to date been embarrassingly and noticeably fact-free. But, Mike, I've got a concern that I want to share with you. I am a little more than a little nervous about the timing of the release of this alleged evidence to the U.S. public next week. In the deep state in this country, I am wondering, Mike, do you think they may be planning a false flag action at home or abroad that would be so shocking, and of course to be blamed on Russia? We'll get back to this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire is continuing on with this comment she has.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the timing of the release of this alleged evidence by Clapper and Company, because I have to ask if the deep state in this country is planning a false flag at home or abroad that would be so shocking, and of course blamed on Russia, that this alleged evidence will become a moot point because the American people will have had their attention misdirected by the alleged crimes of Russia to the point where logic becomes lost in their collective fight-or-flight response to this incident.
Well, the idea is to have something that is so shocking that people's fear overrules their reason.
Yeah.
That was certainly the thinking behind 9/11.
Oh, absolutely.
It was emotionally devastating, the scale. Now, of course, having already done that, planes flown into building, it's passé. They're going to be looking at something really major. And giving the focus on the cyber threat posed by Russia, I think the most likely thing is they're going to blank out the Internet, which is going to automatically get rid of those pesky independent media websites.
Yeah. For a while.
and just blame it all on Russia. Yeah. But I want to plant an idea with all of our listeners, and I hope you will share this with everybody that you know. Why would Russia do something like that?
Absolutely. Cui bono. Who benefits? Not Russia or Putin whatsoever.
It's like I was saying before. If you're trying to find out if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And certainly we've demonstrated this before when they were trying to tell you that Assad had sarin gas and was using it on his own Alawite supporters in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived.
Right.
And the question was, what would be Assad's motive to do something that stupid, knowing it would open the door to a direct U.S. intervention? And the motive wasn't there. The reason wasn't there, which is why, one reason, we knew the story was a lie.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies now with this idea that Russia is going to do something terrible to us. Why would they do it? Why would Putin, knowing it would lead to a war, why would Putin do something like that? What does it get him except a lot of trouble?
Yeah. I mean, the logical answer, short answer, is he wouldn't. And there's another point that I want to bring up here. To those who may be thinking about doing such a thing, this is not 2001 America. Okay?
Good point.
This country has become more skeptical and war-weary. And now people are coming more to the independent media because they know they can't trust the corporate media because it's just going to regurgitate whatever the government tells them to justify a particular agenda. And the American people, I don't think, will be so easily fooled again as they were.
No, they weren't. On 9/11, the vast majority of Americans were still predisposed to believe what the government said, what the corporate media said, that our guys were good, the other guys were bad.
Yep.
Those days are gone.
Yeah.
You know, right now the polls are showing trust and confidence in the U.S. government and the corporate media is in the single digits.
Yep.
Okay? And the reality is if the government shuts down the Internet, and at this point that seems like the only way they're going to be able to shock everybody, stir things up, and also silence the independent media at the same time. Again, why would Russia do something like that? Russia gains nothing from that. The U.S. government gets what it wants. The independent media silenced, people forced to turn their TVs back on and get the propaganda being fed to them by the corporate media. And remember, propaganda against you by your government is now legal, has been legalized since 2013, in which the U.S. government is taking your money away from you and using it to lie to you and trick you into giving them more money and your children for these wars of conquest.
Another part of Obama's legacy.
Well, let's be fair and honest. Obama did not create this all by himself.
No,
he went along with it. He's part of But this has been building for going on 30 years.
Yeah.
We've been seeing this deterioration. And when I first got involved as a truther because of the Vince Foster affair, and because I had a lot of time on my hand after I got blacklisted out of Hollywood. But I began to see past Vince Foster and even past the Clintons to this larger pattern that was unfolding, that was leading us inevitably to a new world war, potentially nuclear, and we've got to derail that. And possibly with the loss of Syria, they may rethink their plans. But unfortunately, I think they've gone so far down this road of the project for the new American century, they feel they can't turn around. And they may even start a war with Russia, knowing 90% of the American people know it's all a pile of bovine excrement. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to step back to a comment that Claire was making about Clapper was on the attack against Russia today for disparaging our system. And what's really going on here is you need to remember there's nothing in Russia today that is factually incorrect, or they would be sued. And what Clapper is really upset about is this carefully manufactured illusion of what the U.S. is supposed to be, as presented to the American people, is coming apart. And that's what they're angry about.
Yeah.
When he's talking about disparaging our system, he's talking about pointing out that much of it is a lie perpetrated on the American people and the world. Right. That's the same issue they have with the leaking of the DNC emails. They don't even want to talk about the fact that Hillary and her people were actually writing all this stuff. Nobody has said any of it's fake because it's duplicated in multiple places, Judicial Watch, congressional investigations. We know this is the real emails. Their anger is over the fact that the carefully cultivated illusion of the public Hillary was shattered, and Americans got to see the real Hillary Clinton, just like Americans are getting to see the real U.S. government, and they understand the American people are not going to stand for the real true nature of our politicians and our government. And right now we're in the same situation the Soviet Union was in mere months before its collapse, when a group of Soviet citizens started communicating with each other on fax machines. They didn't have internet and computers like we do, but they started all across the Soviet Union writing articles from their own direct knowledge. The government is lying about this. And they would put it in a fax machine. It would be programmed to send to 10 other fax machines. The people in those fax machines would read the articles, maybe add something to it, stick it in their fax machine, and it would go to another 10 machines, 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. And in a matter of just a few hours, these articles would be all over the Soviet Union. And it took away from the Soviet Union their ability to lie to and propagandize their people successfully. And absent that, the Soviet Union collapsed. And I think the United States is headed in the same direction. I was hoping that under President Trump we could avoid that and turn around and start that long trek back to a constitutional republic with an honestly democratically elected leadership. But looking at these various intelligence agencies and politicians like John McCain, it does seem like our current government is past the point of redemption, and we're going to have to go through that collapse that I've been concerned about. Unless the U.S. does succeed in starting a war with Russia, and we have to go back to worrying about mushroom clouds. Take it away.
Thank you. The next thing I'd like to look at and share with our listeners and readers. U.S. officials say Russian approval of Trump win is evidence of hacking. The evidence that Russia was behind the hacking of the Democratic Party. Well, this is about as flimsy as anything else they can trot out, and yet this appears to be the entire cornerstone of their narrative, that Russia was happy that Trump won the election. And officials conceded that important evidence that led to their conclusion only came after the election was finished, by way of explaining they didn't make any accusations before the vote. And the Washington Post report quotes senior officials, of course they're not named, of that conclusion. It was intercepted by private communications showing that Russia was happy with the outcome of the election. Well, I've got a short memo to the editorial board of the Washington Compost.
Yes.
You first, dear.
Well, I mean, half of America was happy with Donald Trump's election victory. I was happy with Donald Trump's election victory. So was Claire. That's not proof that we hacked into the DNC computers. That it is flimsy in the extreme, and they're already trying to walk back from that one. They understand that breeze they felt on their bottom was the shark fin whizzing by.
Yes.
Or as they whizzed by the shark.
Yeah. And my memo to the Washington Compost is, you can't double down on nothing and pretend that you actually have something, which is exactly what they've done with this false justification of blaming Russian hackers for breaches in the DNC when the FBI was refused access to the DNC's computers in the first place after the claims of hacking went public. I think rather than happy at the outcome from the Russian side, the more correct word would be relieved. Because, Michael, they knew what the heck was coming from a Clinton presidency.
Yes.
A three-letter word called war.
Absolutely.
Clinton is a card-carrying warmonger and darling of the military-industrial complex. And if you take a look at her campaign, the CVs of her advisors, I challenge anyone to tell me that any of these people would be willing to, quote-unquote, give peace a chance. Not until the pigs fly. Hillary Clinton's national security advisors were a who's who of the warfare state, and her Syria policy would have included war with Russia. They wanted her, the military-industrial complex wanted her as their president big time because she was in lockstep with their agenda. We, the people, are not. And as a peace activist myself working with Mike, I was relieved when Trump won the election because although I still think that if he feels military action's the only way to get something done, I sincerely believe, Mike, that he will explore all possible peaceful options before his military is directed to put our young men and women who serve in harm's way. Clinton, on the other hand, wouldn't care.
No, look at her tenure as Secretary of State.
Yeah.
She was sticking the U.S. government's nose in everybody's business all over the globe, and they've left a real mess of the world.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump has come into office. He won the election, said, we're not going to do this anymore. This is not working. We're not going to do it anymore. And that is a threat to everybody in the establishment whose fame and fortune and wealth and power and privilege depends on other people around the world bleeding to death.
Yes. Yeah, and there are way too many of them.
Yes.
I would like to talk about a comment that Jordan has made about the potential of moving the Israeli capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And apparently Jordan thinks this is going to be a seismic, catastrophic move with tremendous repercussions for Trump's plan to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
I agree. One of the few areas where I disagree with Donald Trump is his support for Israel, which I understand a lot of that's coming from Sheldon Adelson.
Right.
A lot of that's coming from Alex Jones, unfortunately. The reality here is, again, and I said this even before the election, my main concern about Donald Trump is that too much of his worldview has been shaped by the corporate media. And even though right now, today, he understands the corporate media is very deceptive, he hasn't taken that next step of looking back over everything he's ever been told to see whether or not it, too, may be a fiction. He may be laboring under the illusion that the corporate media only started lying about everything over this last year to get Donald Trump here. But it will be catastrophic, and I'm hoping that Trump will take a pause.
Yeah.
And as I said before, I think when Donald Trump actually starts interacting directly with the Israeli government, he's going to discover that once again, the reality on the ground is not what he was seeing on his TV set. And I think after about a year, his enthusiasm for Israel is definitely going to cool.
The spokesperson for the Jordanian government, Mohammed Manami, said in public that the embassy move would be a red line for Jordan, which would inflame the Islamic and Arab streets and serve as a gift to extremists. The guy is right.
Yes, he absolutely is. He absolutely is.
One of the things that surely will happen is we will probably see more violence in Israel. But unfortunately right now, the world is forced to deal with one of the most churlish, hubristic, and genocidal Israeli heads of state we have ever witnessed, and that would be one Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Who, if we're lucky, will be on his way to prison. My main concern is the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem will be seen by Israel as justification for continuing to declare that all of Jerusalem should be theirs, and will escalate more Israeli home demolitions and building in East Jerusalem, and that will just inflame the situation a little bit more. And again, it all gets back to that same problem. Israel is still running itself like a Bronze Age barbaric tribal chiefdom. And smiting everybody. I mean, if you read the Old Testament, there's a lot of violence in there.
Oh, there's a lot of smiting.
There's a lot of smiting going on back and forth there. And, the God of the New Testament is, much more peaceful. I don't know, maybe having a kid mellowed him out or something. But, there's a lot of violence there, and Israel still, because of that linkage between their religion and their government, they want to sort of relive all of that again. And as a result, we have a country that has still refused, after 60-plus years, to draw an official set of borders and to live within them. Because in too many Israelis' minds, the official borders for Israel are those declared in the Bible, the Nile and the Euphrates.
And the problem with Netanyahu's mindset, it almost appears that he welcomes violence as a pretext for war against his neighbors. And, Mike, remember, Obama just signed off on a $30 billion blank check for military and financial aid over the next 10 years. And I wonder how prominently that figures into Netanyahu's plans to attack his neighbors.
Well, I understand we're going to sell him a bunch of F-35s. That'll serve him right.
I don't think he will try to take over either Iran or Syria because of Russian support of those countries.
No, he's going to use the U.S. to do that.
But I do worry about Lebanon, because it's known that the Israeli government would like to expropriate the Litani River in Lebanon, which at some points in its path is only 5 kilometers from the Israeli border.
Well, Iran has now stepped into that, offering to arm the Lebanese army against a coming Israeli invasion. It's getting a little dicey out there. I would like to now move to an op-ed. I want to take a second here, and I want to put out a request to Monsanto. As long as they're tinkering around with that epicite gene to sterilize human beings, could we modify it so it only sterilizes the psychopathic, power-mad, narcissistic warmongers?
But they provide so much of the support to Monsanto, dear. I'm afraid that's not going to happen.
Oh, darn it. Here I had a vision of all these warmongers and their genitalia plop off onto the ground. The dog grabs it and runs off.
Ouch. Yes. There was an op-ed in Blacklisted News, again, one site that I find very sober and very intelligent. And the title of this article was, "Very Powerful People in the U.S. Government Want War." This is their sales pitch.
Well, I say give them all rifles and parachutes and let them go have fun.
And there is this hysteria that you're hearing, this anti-Russian propaganda, and the war drums beating and getting louder and faster. The war is best understood as fulfilling 2 needs for official Washington, a.k.a. the deep state. The military-industrial complex transitioning from the war on terror to a more lucrative new Cold War and blunting the threat that President Trump poses to the neoconservative liberal interventionist foreign policy establishment. By hyping the Russian threat, the neocons and their liberal hawk sidekicks, who include much of the mainstream U.S. news media, can guarantee bigger military budgets from Congress. The hype also sets in motion a blocking maneuver to impinge any significant change in direction for U.S. foreign policy under Trump. So I've got a little memo to the American and Russian governments. The American people adamantly do not want war with Russia. And to the American government, I have been able to believe a single thing that you have said to the American people since 9/11, which was a notorious pack of lies you used to sell the American people on the other lies upon which you predicated the invasion and occupation of both Afghanistan and Iraq.
Sorry.
As a Christian pacifist activist with a voice on this blog who constantly entreats her government to resolve its geopolitical issues through moral and hard-won negotiations rather than through war, I have to warn our readers that the U.S. government would be making an horrific mistake by pushing a war against China or Russia right now, because pulling back and looking at the big picture, I understand without question that our military doesn't have the weaponry, the money, the troop strength, or the manufacturing to ensure a positive result from a conventional war against Russia. Why do I say that? Because right now, when U.S. weapons are field deployed, they are many times so late as to be obsolete relative to their original mission, absolutely do not work as advertised. Remember the F-35? And are hideously over budget. Now, Russia and China are getting a lot more bang for their weaponry buck right now without paying anywhere near what the U.S. is paying for equipment that doesn't quite measure up. And there are a number of new hypersonic weapons that the Russians are developing and hybrid atomic weapons. And to put the U.S. military and its people into a war the U.S. military most probably cannot win for the reasons I've just articulated is the ultimate betrayal of the American people and our military by elements of the deep state in this country, and it must be peacefully and logically stopped in its tracks.
I would agree. Now, getting on back to this issue about the American people not wanting war, I want to share a quote with you. Why, of course, the people don't want war. Why should some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. End quote. This was Hermann Goering, shortly before he was executed for his war crimes here. And the world of Hermann Goering, though, I don't think exists anymore. Because, again, he operated in a country where the majority of the people were predisposed to believe what the government was saying and to trust them. That world is kind of gone.
I really think it is.
All right, well, listen, we're coming up on a commercial break, and before we get in there, more developments on the Fort Lauderdale shooting. Apparently the shooter was actually on a flight that flew into the airport, went down to baggage claim, pulled the gun out of his checked baggage, and started shooting.
How did the gun get into his checked baggage unchecked by TSA?
Well, apparently that's a big mystery there. They're still not saying that they have any idea what the motive was.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Would help if I turned up the volume here. Welcome to the last segment of our show on this Kaahumanu Friday, and you had one more story you wanted to share with us.
Yes, I did. There are some troubling accusations coming up regarding Treasury nominee Steve Mnuchin's bank, which was accused of widespread misconduct in a leaked memo. Apparently, Mnuchin's candidacy for this office is in trouble. The bank that he ran from 2009 to 2005, which was One West Bank, which is a California bank, repeatedly broke California's foreclosure laws during that period, according to a previously undisclosed memo in 2013 from top prosecutors in the state attorney general's office. The memo was obtained by The Intercept, and Glenn Greenwald, wherever you are, God bless you. You're usually very right on. It alleges that One West rushed delinquent homeowners out of their homes by violating notice and waiting period statutes, illegally backdated key documents, and effectively gamed foreclosure auctions. And if, in fact, these accusations prove true, it's very troubling to me.
Well, it is very troubling, and it's going to pose the first challenge for Donald Trump. And I think what we can take away from this is that above a certain level of our society, they're all corrupt. In fact, I remember this wonderful quote from the third Godfather movie, where the storyline is where Michael Corleone is trying to take his family and its business to be perfectly legitimate. And he keeps saying, you know, the higher I go, the crookeder it gets, and that really does seem to be the case.
Yeah.
And I think all of life could be considered a cesspool, and the really big chunks are going to float to the top.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. So us little chunks down here, we got to do our job and keep on trying to educate the public about what's going on. We're down to the last 2 minutes in our show here, and I want to go back and I want to reprise something about all this Russian propaganda. You will note at the top of the What Really Happened webpage, which has been under almost constant hack attack during the radio show today, there is a graphic there that points out Russian hacking is the 2016, now 2017, the picture's out of date already, is the 2017 version of Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. It's the same players, the same intelligence organizations, the same people, like Clapper. Clapper even admits he was a big part of that report about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction that sent so many of our young people to be killed and crippled in Iraq. And they're doing it again because it's all they know how to do. The only way we're going to stop them from trying a false flag is to create a sense of doubt that their official story will be believed. And we're already doing that because we're seeing in polls all over the independent media, nobody is buying the Russian hacking story. And this may actually be like the first really major battle between the corporate media and the independent media over who's really in control of what Americans are thinking. And at least for the moment, we're winning, but the other side does love to play dirty.
Amen to that.
There it is. There's our music. It's time for us to get on out of here. And have a really good weekend. Remember, you are all Rivero's Rangers. You are parts of the independent media. Take what you learn here from the website, radio show, share it everywhere that you can. Go gently. Don't trigger their defense mechanisms. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.